And good morning, everybody. And this is Walter, the Dutch mentor. I'm here again today with Dan Kowalski, who we met and spoke to some time ago. And I'm happy to have him back. He has written a phenomenal book that brings focus to his work. And of course, it is a great story to tell. So without any further ado, Dan, welcome back to the our vlog session. And tell us a little bit about what you have done over the last year and how you came up with the book title and what it is all about.
Hi, Walter. Thanks. Yeah. So I'm sure many people in your audience have either someone has said to them or they've said to someone else, "Hey, you should write a book." I'm never going to say that to anyone again. I'm going to say you could write a book, but you've got to be crystal clear about what you want to do with it. Having said that, I had the chance to meet a book coach, and I've written a book called Wise Choices at Work: Go from Doubting to Decisive When the Clock is Ticking. And I've always been about decision making and used the term WISE in the past, but now I've identified WISE as an acronym, and it stands for Weighed, Informed, Sufficient, and Effective. And weighed means, what's the downside of the choice you're making? Because what happens a lot is we get so excited about the upside that we either overlook or never even think about looking about the downside. And that's usually what causes us to have failure in our decisions. No one ever says to me, "Oh, my decision went way too good." What they say is, "Oh, I didn't see that coming." I is for informed, and that means most decisions happen not just with you, but with others. And how will they be impacted? What's their feedback? If you get that ahead of time, you'll typically make a better choice. S is for sufficient. Sufficient means, what's the bare minimum that you need to be successful with the decision? Sometimes we try to add too much and we overlook the obvious. I'll provide a quick example of that right now. I was working with a client who was starting up a food factory in India. And if you've ever started up a factory or anything new, you don't want everything to start all at once. So the piece that made the finished product before it went into final packaging was the first piece available. They had none of the inputs. The expert on the team said, "Hey, I know what we can do. We'll rent time on the pilot plant in the United States. We'll buy all the raw materials, make everything up through but not finished, put it in special containers that we'll buy, air freight it to India, pay the tariff, and we can run the equipment." It says if we push the schedule, it will be $800,000 and 6 weeks. Everyone said, "Oh, great, we have an answer." I said, "Well, we have an answer. Let's see what else is available." I said, "Does anybody in India make what we want?" "Oh, you don't understand. It has to be food grade." I said, "No, I get it has to be food grade, but we don't care what it looks like, smells like, tastes like. We just want to know if the equipment works." "Huh, that's an idea. We should look into that." Time zone difference back to India. They were meeting in the US, 9.5 hours. They had an answer the next day. And guess what? They found something. 1 week, $50,000. And here's the crazy thing. The company made it. It was one of their own factories that made a sweet product. They were making a savory product. They asked, "How can we make it?" I said, "How can we get it?" The sufficient was they needed the material. They didn't have to make it. They just needed it to be food grade. And then the E stands for effective, which means how do I maximize? And the subtitle is important. Going from doubting to decisive when the clock is ticking. We don't have enough time these days. So what I've done in the book is I've created what I call a 5-minute question. It doesn't take 5 minutes to ask the question. Typically, the question's under a minute. In the first 5 minutes, you're going to get a sense for, is this a wise choice or not? I provide guidance on what a good answer looks like. I provide guidance on what a better answer looks like and the best answer. I also provide information on what a bad answer is. So a very quick one. If you ask the question, what's the downside of an option? And someone says nothing, that is a bad answer because everything will always have some level of downside. And that's what we want to be understanding. What can go wrong and be prepared for it, or at least accept it and not be surprised by it later. Now, having said that, can every decision be made in under 5 minutes? No. So then what I offer is a 1-hour work session specific to the type of decision that you're making. Because if you have only two options, that's called a dilemma. And that decision making is different than when you have three or more. And I also provide, there are times when you have one option. You say, how is that possible? Well, one option means someone else has already made the decision, and your job is to figure out, did they do good decision making? And then there's also the situation, believe it or not, where you have zero options. And how will that be a decision? Well, those are the situations where you have to create the option. You have to understand what's going to give you what you're looking for. New product development is an example of this. Startups certainly do this on a regular basis. And the key is to have good thinking. And one of the things that gets in the way of being a good, deliberate decision maker is we have time pressure. So what I've done is I help people understand, when do they need to be deliberate with their decision making, and when is it okay to default to automatic. So I've created a bit of a landscape, a little difficult to do in audio, but I'll do my best. So imagine on the bottom left to right, from low to high is the uncertainty of the option's performance. So if you're buying a mobile phone, you pretty much know how it will operate. And even if you're selecting a mobile provider, you have pretty good information. So it has low uncertainty. Now imagine you're hiring someone to fill a position on your team or in your company. In those situations, you have to make more of a prediction of how they're going to fit in your culture with your team and be able to do the job. So that would have higher uncertainty. So that's the uncertainty factor left to right. Now go top to bottom, the y-axis. The impact of choosing wrong, low to high. If you choose the wrong mobile phone, you normally have 7 days to return it. So it's got a very low impact. Something with a high impact but low uncertainty would be picking a place to have a client dinner. Now, you know all about the pricing and all of that, but what you don't know is what your client is going to think. If you go too cheap, they will think, oh, they don't really think that much of me. If you're too expensive, they might say, oh my gosh, this is where the fees are going. Also, and I make a joke of this, but it's not something to joke about. Imagine inviting a vegetarian to a steak dinner. That really wouldn't work well. So that has a high impact of even something with a low uncertainty of the performance. And now if you go to sort of high uncertainty and high impact, that might be something like a career decision or a new product launch for that matter. In those cases, with high, we have to think about it a lot more. And in the low, like the the mobile phone, we don't have to think about it much at all. The real challenge with decision making is the mixed rating, low, high, or high, low. And I call that the decision danger zone, because what happens a lot is that people will tend to default to, I'll just use my normal tried and true, and they may overlook some of the important aspects of decision making. So that's what I've tried to cover in my book. I don't know how long that was, but I guess now I'll pause and let you ask some questions, because Walter, you always have them.
Well, so thank you for sharing that. Very intriguing, very interesting. So again, a lot of the stuff that I'm hearing is that it has to do with behavior, right? It is the behavior of the decision maker itself. And what I've found too is that when I work with leaders, is that analysis paralysis, right? That middle, low, high, middle. That people, what to do, and some people get stuck in the data and can make a decision at all, or sometimes they make a decision which they, like you have explained in our first conversation, they have that same key lock and they use the same key to open up the lock every single time, while it requires maybe something out of the box thinking. And that's where I think the challenge really lies, is that the behavior of people and the confines of the brain itself to always want to think within that same box. Is that right? How can I get people to think outside of the box, to look for options that are otherwise not available or obvious, like the example you used for the India operation, about having either going back to the US, have an $800,000 solution versus a $50,000 solution. How can I bring that out of them? Now, by your background, I believe you're an engineer background, so you're very process orientated on that particular part. So, how is it that, maybe you have some examples? How have you taken somebody who is in that analysis paralysis or can't think outside the box kind of thinking? What exercises do you do with them in order to have them think outside of that box so they can look at the different options available, and really bring options to the table. And secondly, the question is that I'm a believer in testing, by looking for the testing of the positive upstream or the negative downstream effects, and do that in a controlled environment, so piloting. And that comes with a bit of from my Six Sigma background, where you always want to test things out in a controlled phase before you implement it system wide. So just your two, I would love to have some insight on that, on the behavior of outside the box thinking and piloting.
Well, so here's the thing. I'm not sure it's so much outside the box as much as it is inside the box in the right place in the box. So Kahneman talks about thinking fast and thinking slow. I like to think of that as automatic thinking and deliberate thinking. And typically with automatic thinking, that's where we want to be so in the box that we don't realize that there's a little more space within that. So what I find helps the most is asking a question that disrupts the automatic thinking. So the technical expert, he had automatic thinking. He knew exactly how to get the product that he was looking for. He had done it many times. All I asked is someone make it in India. And that caused them to think differently. So I find that getting people to move to a different spot in their box is by asking a question that disrupts what they were currently thinking. I don't do it in an adversarial way. I just ask a question because I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the advantage I bring to things. Now, with respect to the idea of testing, that's an interesting one. Whenever possible, that's a great answer. In fact, one of the books that I reviewed as I was putting together my book is Chip and Dan Heath wrote a book called Decisive. And as one of their techniques, they call it ooching, which is incremental movement into the decision. And whenever you have that opportunity, I think it's great. It's especially important when you have uncharted territory, the zero option, where you're creating it. I think rather than going all in on a giant answer, doing some minimal viable product is a way to get a feel for what's there. And the ideas from Stephen Bland's book, Testing Business Ideas, where you have a small hypothesis and then you evaluate that hypothesis with a planned experiment where you understand, well, how will I know if I've been successful here? I think that's invaluable for many decisions. Having said that, when we go back to the landscape I was talking about, when you don't have that option of, oh, I'll test drive the new job, and if I don't like it, they'll let me go back to my old one, doesn't happen so much. So that means you have to really spend the time thinking it through to imagine and gather information of what could go down, what could be wrong about this, what's the downside. In fact, I start out the book with a decision. So we as humans, well, I'll say, well, I think we as humans, but certainly here in the United States, we make one of the biggest business decisions in our lives before we ever really have a paycheck. And that's, what will I do after I graduate from high school? That has a huge impact on the rest of our lives. And in some cases, it's off to university. For some people, it's learning a trade. For others, it might be to go into the military. Or in these days, it might be starting a business without any MBA or anything like that. And when I was going off to university, the night before I was leaving, my father saw I was packing up the last bits, and my father said, "You look worried." And I said, "I am." He goes, "What if I made a wrong decision?" And my father had never been to college, but he he was a smart man, probably smarter than any college people I know. And he said, so you'll transfer. You won't be the first one nor the last one to do that. And once he put the downside into perspective for me, I had a great time. Went to Syracuse University and never even entertained the idea of transferring. But by knowing that it wasn't irreversible, that helped. So I think that's important to understand with decisions, if they can be sort of not necessarily reversed, but oh, it's not disaster. But the ones that are disaster, you got to have to think them through.
Yeah, very interesting. So that comes to mind that I use a simple mathematical equation of E times R equals O. That live events are going to happen, so decisions need to be made. It is how we respond to them versus how we react to them that's going to give us an outcome that is more likely aligned to what it is that we value or that we want to get out of it. There's also a difference between what we call that automatic thinking, lower brain, the fight or flight versus the upper brain, where it's more process, giving a little bit more time to kind of go through the process steps and understanding what the impact is, or to think, outside the box or in different spots within the box, that there is, something else available to help you make the decision. So listen, I think that we could talk for another hour on this topic, but I would encourage people to pick up the book because it is something that should be of great interest, because great decisions lead to better outcomes. And in order to be able to do that, you need to be wise along the way, not to take anything away. So I would love, give us a couple of parting words. Tell us where they can find you, where they can find the book. And I'll certainly leave a copy of it at the tail end of the vlog as well, so people can have access to it.
Yeah, so on LinkedIn, I'm a solution instigator. And the reason I use that title is I don't have answers. I have questions, and the answers are usually within the organization I'm working with. My website is planathinking.com, and the book is available on Amazon, Wise Choices at Work.
Dan, thank you very much. As always, I really, really appreciate it. I wish you much success. And if people are wise, they pick up a copy right after the show today. Thank you, and we'll talk soon again.
Thank you very much, Walter. Have a good day.